In the summer of 1991, an ordinary day turned into an unforgettable nightmare. A young girl disappeared without a trace, snatched in broad daylight from her own neighborhood, sending shockwaves through her tight-knit community. For nearly 2 decades, her fate remained an agonizing mystery. Families prayed fervently, investigators tirelessly searched, yet answers remained heartbreakingly elusive. Then, after 18 years of haunting silence, a stunning breakthrough emerged, one that would rewrite history and send shockwaves around the globe. This is a story you won't believe, but one you need to hear. June 10th, 1991 dawned with the crisp, hopeful promise of summer vacation. 11-year-old J.C. Lee Dugard, dressed in her favorite outfit, a vibrant ensemble of pink from head to toe. Pink was J.C.'s color. It filled her with confidence and happiness. Her mother, Terry, had already departed for her shift at the print shop, leaving J.C. to head to the school bus stop alone, a routine she had comfortably followed countless times before. But something about that morning felt subtly different. An unexplainable tension hanging in the air. From inside the family home, her stepfather, Carl Probin, watched from a window as J.C. walked up the familiar hillside road. Her bright pink attire stood out sharply against the tranquil mountain backdrop. Their home in Myers, California, just south of Lake Tahoe, was supposed to be safe. Terry had deliberately moved her family there from bustling Los Angeles County, seeking refuge in a place where neighbors knew one another. Children walked safely to school, and peace seemed guaranteed. Yet safety, tragically, can sometimes be merely an illusion. J.C. had walked halfway up the hill when a gray car slowed alongside her. At first, she thought nothing of it. Visitors frequently stopped in this quiet mountain town seeking directions, and J.C. was always eager to help. But the car didn't carry tourists looking for landmarks. It carried darkness. Through the roll-down window, J.C. glimpsed the driver, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man. Hidden from her view was the sinister device. He held a device destined to shatter lives forever. From his vantage point, Carl witnessed a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw the gray car suddenly execute a sharp U-turn near the bus stop, frantic movements within, and then J.C. being forcibly dragged inside. In sheer desperation, Carl raced after them on his bicycle, his heart pounding in terror. But a bicycle was no match for a speeding car. Within moments, the vehicle vanished down the winding mountain roads, carrying J.C. into an unimaginable nightmare that would span 18 years. The school bus arrived at its usual time, but J.C. wasn't there. Her stunned classmates, some having seen the abduction themselves, watched helplessly as the bus finally drove away, its seats missing the cheerful girl who should have been laughing with friends. Instead, J.C. had begun a harrowing journey no child should endure. Who was the driver behind that grey car? Why, J.C. Behind the wheel sat Philip Craig Garrido, a 40-year-old man whose life had spiraled progressively into darkness. Born in Pittsburgh, California, Philip had once been described by his father as a good boy. However, a motorcycle accident in his youth led him down a path littered with drugs and deviant behavior. J.C. had unknowingly encountered a convicted kidnapper and rapist. 15 years earlier, in 19 76, Philip committed a brutal crime, hauntingly similar to JC's abduction. He had kidnapped and horrifically assaulted 25-year-old Catherine Calloway in South Lake Tahoe. Tahoe, the very same area where JC now lived. A vigilant police officer had saved Catherine by investigating suspicious activity. But Philip, despite receiving a 50-year sentence, shockingly served only 11 years before being released on parole. Now free and living in Antioch, California, Philip resided with his wife Nancy, whom he had met and married while imprisoned. Their relationship, founded in manipulation and shared depravity, blossomed behind bars, eventually setting the stage for new atrocities. On parole, Philip wore a GPS ankle monitor, routinely visited by parole officers, ostensibly under close supervision. Yet behind the facade of compliance, Philip plotted his next horrific crime. That morning, in the grey car, Nancy Garrido sat beside Philip, both hunting deliberately, not for directions, but for a vulnerable victim. Returning ominously to familiar territory, they found JC turning her innocent walk to school into a terrifying chapter in history, where Philip had successfully kidnapped before. The moment G approached the car, Philip struck. The device in his hand was a stun gun, and he used it without hesitation. Hasi collapsed unconscious, her small body crumpling as 50,000 volts course through her. Nancy immediately dragged the unconscious child into the car, stripping away her clothes, but leaving only a small, butterfly-shaped ring that G wore. As Carl Provin pedaled desperately after them on his bicycle, the grey car was already speeding toward the highway. Inside, Nancy held a blanket over the unconscious child, while Philip drove with the focused determination of a man who had done this before. The 3-hour drive to Antioch gave Shasi time to drift in and out of consciousness. The only words she spoke during the entire journey were a plea born of innocence and desperation. Her parents couldn't afford to pay a ransom, but this wasn't about money. This was about something far more sinister. What Hasi didn't know was that she was being taken to a house of horrors, a place where reality itself would be twisted beyond recognition. The property at 1554 Walnut Avenue in Antioch looked ordinary from the street, but behind the house lay a secret world that would become her prison for the next 18 years. The Guerrero property in Antioch appeared normal to anyone driving past. It was a modest home in an unincorporated area, surrounded by other typical suburban houses, but appearances can be deceiving. And behind the main house lay a carefully constructed world of secrets. When a grey car pulled into the driveway, Hasi was still covered by the blanket, barely conscious. From the shock of the stun gun, Nancy and Philip carried her to the backyard, where they had spent months preparing for this moment. What they had created was a prison disguised as a makeshift campground. The backyard was divided into 2 sections. The front area looked normal enough, a typical suburban space where neighbors might occasionally glimpse the Guros going about their daily lives. But the back section was hidden from view, accessible only through a narrow passage, concealed by trees and tarps. In the secret area, Philip had constructed a series of ramshackle structures, dilapidated tents, small sheds and lean-tos that would serve as JC's world for nearly 2 decades. One particular shed had been specially prepared for this day. It was small, cramped, and had been soundproofed to ensure that no screams could escape. Philip dragged the barely conscious child into the shed and secured it with a heavy bolt. He told her about the Doberman pinchers that supposedly patrolled the area, trained to attack anyone who tried to escape. In reality, there were no such dogs, but G had no way of knowing this was just another lie in what would become an endless series of deceptions. The shed became G's entire universe. It contained a bucket for her bodily functions, a thin mattress, and little else. She was kept in handcuffs, naked and terrified, visited only by Philip, who would occasionally bring her fast food and engage in rambling conversations about religion and his twisted worldview. For the first week, Hasi remained chained and confused. She had no idea where she was or what had happened to her. Normal life. The 11-year-old girl who had walked up that hill in her pink outfit was gone, replaced by a terrified child trying to understand why this was happening to her. But the worst was yet to come. 7 days after kidnapping, Philip entered the shed with a different purpose. What happened next would mark the beginning of a horror that would continue for years. The details are too disturbing to recount fully, but it was the first time Philip forced himself on the child, beginning a pattern of abuse that would continue throughout her captivity. As weeks turned to months, the shed became less of a prison and more of a twisted home. Philip eventually moved G to a slightly larger space, chaining her to a bed. He would disappear for days at a time on what he called runs, methamphetamine binges, that would leave him paranoid and violent. During these drug-fueled episodes, Philip would force G to participate in his delusions. He claimed to hear voices from the walls and insisted that she was sent to him. Thank you for choosing my video among thousands of videos out there to watch. Helping me with a subscription of yours is very small but very big and too valuable. By demon angels to help with his sexual problems, he alternated between sobbing apologies and threats to sell her to people who would keep her in a cage. The psychological manipulation was as devastating as the physical abuse. Philip presented himself as both her savior and her tormentor, creating a twisted dependency that would make escape seem impossible, even when opportunities arose. But Hasi wasn't entirely alone in this nightmare. 7 months into her captivity, she would meet the other half of this disturbing partnership, Nancy Garrido, the woman who had helped orchestrate her kidnapping and would play a crucial role in maintaining her imprisonment. Nancy Garrido entered G's life like a twisted fairy godmother, bearing gifts of stuffed animals and chocolate milk. But her appearance marked not rescue, but the introduction of a new form of psychological torture. Nancy was not the reluctant accomplice one might expect. She was a willing participant in Philip's crimes, driven by her own jealousy and twisted sense of ownership. When she first met JC, Nancy alternated between motherly concern and cold cruelty, creating a confusing dynamic that would define their relationship for years to come. The woman who worked as a nursing home aide by day became G's second captor by night. Nancy saw the child not as a victim to be pitied, but as a rival for Philip's attention. She blamed G for her own predicament, as if an 11-year-old child had somehow chosen to disrupt their marriage. NY's manipulations were subtler but no less damaging than Philip's direct abuse. She would shower JC with momentary kindness, only to withdraw it without warning. She would express concern for the child's well-being, then participate in maintaining the conditions of her imprisonment when Philip was briefly returned to prison for failing a drug test. Nancy stepped seamlessly into the role of primary jailer. She proved just as capable of maintaining the psychological control that kept Hasi trapped, demonstrating that the imprisonment was not just one man's obsession, but a shared delusion between two deeply disturbed individuals. As she grew from a child into a teenager in captivity, the Guerrios began to construct increasingly elaborate lies about their situation. They told neighbors that G was a relative, explaining away her presence when she was occasionally glimpsed in the backyard. The property itself became more secure over time. Philip built an 8-foot fence around the backyard and installed additional barriers to prevent prying eyes from seeing into their secret world. He set up a tent where G could spend time outside, the first taste of fresh air she had experienced since her kidnapping. But even these small freedoms came with devastating psychological costs. The Guerritos would occasionally give G kittens to care for, allowing her to experience moments of joy and companionship. Then, without warning, the animals would mysteriously vanish, leaving Hasi heartbroken and more isolated than before. The cruelest manipulation came when Philip discovered that G was keeping a journal about the kittens. In this journal, she had written her real name, JC, the first time she had been allowed to use her identity in captivity. Philip forced her to tear out the page containing her name, symbolically erasing her identity and ensuring that she would not speak or write her real name again for the next 18 years. The psychological prison was now complete. Hasi had been stripped not just of her freedom, but of her very identity. She was no longer J.C. Lee Dugard, the 11-year-old girl who loved pink and was excited about a school field trip. She was whatever the Goros wanted her to be, but the human spirit has a remarkable capacity for survival, and Hasi was about to discover reserves of strength she never knew she possessed, because her greatest challenge was yet to come. 3 years. In her captivity, G's body began to change in ways that no 14-year-old should have to endure. Alone the Guerritos noticed before she did. Her small body was carrying the consequences of Philip's continued abuse. Easter Sunday, 1994, marked a turning point in G's imprisonment. For the first time since her kidnapping, the Doritos gave her cooked food instead of the usual fast food meals. It was a small gesture that carried enormous significance. They were preparing for something. When they told her she was pregnant, G's world shifted once again. At 13 years old, she had learned about the connection between sex and pregnancy from television. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of carrying a child while still being a child herself. The Guerrios' reaction to the pregnancy revealed the depths of their delusion. Rather than seeing it as evidence of their crimes, they treated it as a blessed event. Philip claimed it was part of God's plan, while Nancy began to see an opportunity to finally have the family she had always wanted. Hasi spent the months of her pregnancy watching television programs about childbirth, trying to prepare herself for something no teenager should face alone. She had no access to medical care, no prenatal vitamins, no doctor to monitor her health or the baby's development. She was entirely dependent on her captor's twisted version of care. On August 18, 1994, at age 14, Hasi gave birth to her first daughter in the backyard compound. The birth took place in one of the makeshift structures with only Nancy acting as midwife. It was a moment that should have been joyous, but it was overshadowed by the circumstances of her captivity. The baby's arrival changed the dynamics of the household. Philip's abuse of Hasi became less frequent, though it never stopped entirely. He claimed to be transformed by fatherhood, but his actions suggested otherwise. He would still force himself on G when he was under the influence of drugs, showing that his proclaimed spiritual awakening was as false as everything else about him. 3 years later, when Hasi was 17, she gave birth to his second daughter on November 13, 1997. This birth would mark the end of Philip's sexual abuse of G, not because he had found morality, but because he had found other ways to control and manipulate her. The children became both G's greatest joy and her strongest chains. They were innocent victims in this nightmare, but their presence made escape seem impossible. How could she run with two small children? How could she put them at risk? The Guerritos had created the perfect trap. They had made G's love for her children into another form of imprisonment. But the children also gave G something she had lost, a sense of purpose. She threw herself into protecting them, using information gleaned from television to guide her parenting. She created a world of love and stability within the nightmare, showing a strength and resilience that would have been impossible to imagine when she was that 11-year-old girl in pink. The Guerritos continued their psychological manipulation, forcing Hasi to present herself as the children's older sister rather than their mother. Nancy demanded to be called mom, while Hasi was relegated to the role of big sister. This fiction would be maintained for years, even when the family eventually had contact with the outside world. As the children grew, the backyard compound became their entire universe. They knew no other life, no other family structure. To them, this bizarre arrangement was normal. Philip was their father, Nancy was their mother, and Hasi was their older sister who took care of them. But the outside world was still searching, and the Guerritos' secret was becoming harder to maintain. While G was giving birth and raising children in captivity, the outside world had never forgotten about her. The search for J.C. Lee Dugard had become one of the most extensive missing person cases in California history. Within hours of her disappearance, local and national media had descended on the small mountain community of Myers. The image of the 11-year-old girl in her pink outfit was broadcast across the nation, and her story was featured on America's Most Wanted just 4 days after a kidnapping. Terry Proin, JC's mother, founded an organization called JC's Hope, which coordinated volunteer efforts and fundraising campaigns. The town of Myers was blanketed in pink ribbons, JC's favorite color, as a constant reminder of her absence and a symbol of hope for her return. Tens of thousands of flyers were distributed across the United States. Cassette tapes of a song called J.C. Lee were sold, along with t-shirts, sweatshirts, and buttons, to raise money for the search efforts. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and Child Quest International joined the effort, bringing national resources to bear on the case. But despite the massive search effort, the investigation was plagued by false leads and missed opportunities. The initial focus fell on JC's stepfather, Carl Probin, and her biological father, Ken Slayton. Probin, who had witnessed the abduction, was subjected to polygraph tests and intense scrutiny. Slayton, who had barely known JC existed, was also investigated. Both men were were eventually cleared, but precious time and resources have been wasted. The case that had begun with such promise gradually grew cold. Years passed without reliable leads, and the constant pressure took its toll on G's family. The stress contributed to the breakdown of Terry and Carl's marriage, adding another layer of tragedy to an already devastated family. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of the failed investigation was how close authorities came to discovering JC on multiple occasions. The missed opportunities would later become a source of public outrage and legal consequences for the agencies involved. In April 1992, less than a year after G's kidnapping, a man called the Contra County Sheriff's Department from a gas station just 2 miles from the Gario property. He reported seeing a young girl who looked exactly like G, staring intently at a missing child poster of herself. The caller said he saw her leave in a large yellow van, a vehicle that MASH 1 later found on the Gario property. By the time police arrived, the caller, the girl and the van were gone. The caller never identified himself, and the police did not pursue the matter. This single phone call could have ended G's ordeal 17 years early. In June 2002, the Antioch Fire Department responded to a report of a juvenile with a shoulder injury in a swimming pool at the Gario residence. This information was never relayed to Philip's parole office, which had no record of children living at the address. Another opportunity lost. The most egregious missed opportunity came in 2006, when one of the Guerritos' neighbors called 911 to report that there were tents in the backyard with children living in them. The neighbor specifically described Philip as psychotic with sexual addictions. A deputy sheriff visited the property and spoke with Philip at the front door for 30 minutes before leaving, with only a warning about potential code. Philip's 1976 kidnapping of Catherine Calloway in South Lake Tahoe to JC's disappearance from the same region despite the chilling geographic parallels. Over the years, JC's case faded from headlines, yet her family continued to hope, holding candlelight vigils and distributing flyers. Unbeknownst to them, JC was just 120 miles away, raising 2 daughters in secret captivity. By 2009, the Garrido household had evolved drastically. JC, now 28, had spent more than half her life imprisoned, and her daughters were teenagers, the same age JC was when abducted. The Garridos, confident in their ability to evade discovery, began involving JC in their printing business, where she interacted unknowingly with customers who had no idea she was a kidnapping victim. Despite having access to phones and email, JC never reached out for help. Years of psychological manipulation had instilled deep fear and dependency, making the thought of escape terrifying. Neighbors occasionally saw her daughters playing, yet they appeared normal, reinforcing the facade. JC even interacted at the front door without signaling distress. The Garridos' psychological control was complete, creating a twisted sense of normalcy. Philip's escalating delusions and his belief in a divine mission led to increasingly risky behavior. He began publicly appearing with JC's daughters claiming to have a divine message. On August 24, 2009, his bizarre actions attracted attention at the University of California, Berkeley. Campus officials grew suspicious of his erratic behavior and the unusual demeanor of the girls, prompting further investigation. Officer Ali Jacobs discovered Philip's past as a sex offender and alerted parole authorities. When parole officers visited Garrido's home after the incident, they initially failed to uncover anything suspicious, allowing Philip to explain away the presence of minors without verification. Yet realizing the severity of the violation, they summoned Philip to the parole office the next day. On August 26, 2009, Philip arrived with Nancy, the two girls, and a woman claiming to be Alyssa, separated and questioned individually. Alyssa's story quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Her growing anxiety and inconsistent details triggered police involvement. When authorities pressed further, Philip broke down confessing that he had kidnapped and raped Alyssa. Only then did JC Dugard finally speak her true name after 18 harrowing years. JC Dugard's rescue marked the end of a nightmare, yet it opened an entirely new chapter fraught with complex emotional and psychological challenges. Reunited with her mother, Terry Probin, JC faced the overwhelming reality of freedom and a world drastically different from the one she had known. Her daughters mourned Philip's arrest, grieving the loss of the only father figure they knew. JC fiercely rejected assumptions of Stockholm Syndrome, emphasizing that her actions were necessary adaptations for survival. Her story, though difficult to comprehend, stands as a testament to her resilience, determination, and enduring strength. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Your support truly means the world to me. If this video brought you value or resonated with you in any way, feel free to leave a little comment or hit subscribe so we can keep sharing more moments together. See you in the next one.